we are servants for 14 years of our lives to another corporation or industry, we put those chains on willingly. We locked those chains around our neck ourselves, and we continue to do so. And humans will do those things forever until they won't. There's always a breaking point.
This week's special with Miles Franklin Precious Metal Investments. $20, $10, and $5 gold Liberty coins. A true piece of Americana. Call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a returning guest we haven't had on for a long time, far too long. This is Brad Harris. He is the founder and host of Full Spectrum Survival. He joins us again this Saturday, September 18th, 2021. Brad, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone for taking a part of your day to listen to us.
You've joined us since we were reluctant preppers, which we were for the first 6 years or so of our incarnation until we rebranded ourselves Liberty and Finance. It seemed that there was, in addition to persistent concerns about all kinds of different potential risks to our family's livelihood and well-being and that sort of thing, a emerging central theme of a clear and present danger on the economic front that was evidenced by outsized response from our viewers and audience to topics around that. So that became like a central part of the message recently, but we still continue to have at least once a week experts on about preparedness, awareness, and other avenues we should be considering and preparing for to make sure that we are preparing for a good future for our families. We wanted to talk with you about several themes. Can we kick it off with one that's kind of near and dear to both of our hearts? You're a father, husband, head of a household. I'm a father, grandfather, father of 5 and grandfather of 7 at this point, and really feel a weight of responsibility on my shoulders, which is a good thing, to make sure that I'm taking the necessary steps to make sure that we have a safe place for our family to come to, and a place that can be sustainable, a place that's livable, a place that can really provide optionality and futures for our children. You did that. You did it in a very big way. You and your wife did a strategic relocation out of a hurricane portion of Florida, a densely urban area, to a very different area. Could you talk to us about, now it's been a couple of years since you did that, maybe more than a couple, and what that all meant to you and what you feel the central meaning of that is for you in your life, and any lessons learned along the way?
So my wife and I, we like to think of ourselves as very frugal. We try to do things always within our means, not get any sort of credit or anything like that. So it's been a tricky move to go from the middle of Florida, where we had 1 million people in our county, to a city of just 800 plus people here at the southern end of the Appalachian Trail. But we did this knowing that we wanted to, like you said, build more sustainability and preparedness, not just for ourselves, but also for our children and our children's children, if they choose to take that sort of choice down in their future. We moved up here literally with no idea and nothing, but we knew what we wanted and started working towards that. And now we have a nice, thriving homestead with solar and off-grid well pumps and 1 acre garden that we're expanding right now, because we do live on the side of a mountain. So we're terracing the mountainside where usually you can't grow. But if you look at places like Indonesia, Nepal, Malaysia, they terrace their mountainside so that you can turn that into arable, growable land. So we're working on those things constantly and trying to get ahead of what is certainly affecting each one of us. You mentioned how you brand shifted from reluctant preppers over to more economic or finance-based. But in my mind, that disaster is one that we're experiencing, and it's the same, two sides of the same coin. We are going through a financial crisis, biological crisis. We're going through a social crisis. It's really something that is hitting every aspect of our life. And all we can do is look back at history to see when these things have happened before. Well, we have the 1918 pandemic, followed by the financial crisis, followed by war. And that is the same cycle, unfortunately, that our world is going towards today. If you look at what has just happened in the last 72 hours, you see Japan preparing for China to invade Taiwan. And what will happen when that finally, that first bullet flies, is the United States, Japan, South Korea, and many U.S. allies are going to get drawn into a larger international conflict. A lot of people don't want to say that sort of thing will happen. They want to think that humans have evolved beyond that sort of world war mentality. But just 2 years ago, they want to think that humans evolved or technologically advanced beyond any sort of biological threat. And just a couple of months ago, they wanted to say things like there's no way lockdowns or containment and control measures would take place in the USA. And just recently, they would say that there's no way mandatory control measures would be discussed or put forth at a presidential level. And I try to remind people always that we are undergoing the threat of your lifetime. And it really spans across all of those different genres and all of those different areas. And my wife and I are thankful that we were sort of ahead of the curve, seeing the warning signs, seeing the signs on the interstate that said your exit's over here. And we took advantage of that in advance. But that doesn't mean that it's too late. I want everyone to know that if you're in an apartment right now, if you're living with family, if you're, struggling, no matter what it is, you can still do things to get ready. Even if you just grow one plant on your apartment patio, even if you just grow a little, you're removing yourself that much from dependency. And that's all we can do is try to remove ourselves from dependency as to the extent that we each have the financial and the physical means to do so. And by doing that, we're going to relieve ourselves of stress. We're going to teach important values to our children, and we're going to ultimately get ready for what's coming.
Along the way there, you mentioned some very specific steps that you took as a couple and how that changed the game for you. What do you feel your role or your responsibility is towards your children in that? What if they're not interested in that?
We were talking recently with a friend of ours who asked about all the things that we were doing. And she actually asked, what did you do today? And my list went on from, building a new area for the chickens and extending a poultry fence up 10 foot high so that the chickens can't fly out of it, to things like repairing the well and doing a couple of other things. And she said, wow, that's a lot of work. And we talked about how Kelly and I are doing this not just for ourselves, but also for our children, to give them other choices in their future so that if they don't want to work that 9 to 5, they really don't have to. And she said, well, what if you've done all this in vain and they want to move to, New York City and live a different life? And to me, that's perfectly fine. But what I'm building is options for them. And we started going over the math of servitude. If you work 40 hours a week for 52 weeks in a year, and you do that 60 years of your life, you will have worked 14 years worth of 24-hour periods in servitude to a corporation or in servitude towards someone else. And there are some outliers. A veterinarian might love what he does, and so it doesn't feel like work. You might own your own business. Oftentimes you work extra, but it doesn't feel like that same sort of servitude. But it's so disconnected from the economy that all humanity has been bred to do is work in servitude towards somebody else. And so if I can give my children just a little bit of sustainability or a little bit of option there, not only can they weather a larger disaster better, but they're going to have some options in life that they don't have to, feel like they need to wear the same shoes that everybody else does.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's concerning to us is how easy it is. I don't know if it's just fallen human nature and just our tendency towards ease and comfort, that sort of thing, convenience. But it seems like when given the option of, hard work that leads to freedom and independence on the one side versus accepting sort of amenities and luxuries and things like that are made available at reduced cost because the labor is outsourced or the offshored or whatever on the other side, it's very tempting to keep opting over into more and more dependency. And so oftentimes that leads people to relocate into concentrated urban areas where a lot of these, nice things are available and these conveniences and these economies of scale and that kind of thing. But we've talked with like Steve St. Angelo of the SRS Rocco report and others who talk about the fragility of these empires that have always demonstrated when they build, overly concentrated either populations or high technology or long supply chains, and all of that increases the brittleness and the fragility. And we've started to see in the last year and a half some pretty good examples of breakdowns of those supply chains and the rattling of that edifice, that Tower of Babel that we've constructed for ourselves when we find out, oh, we can't finish making trucks anymore because the chips in them come from 50 different countries or whatever. So any thoughts you have on lessons we've learned through this COVID period and how we can apply those to making sure that we do have a future that's not overly dependent or overly brittle or fragile on only a best case scenario being the only way to survivability for our family?
Well, I put a video out yesterday telling people to get 100 days worth of food. And that's really what I felt was an achievable goal for a lot of people. A lot of our followers are what I call dollar store preppers, which I find no problem with. They're on the lower end of the economic ladder, and they're striving to do things every day. But I tell them not to worry, because if you look at Syria, India, Nepal, Venezuela, any of these countries, the poor people who have been living poor are the ones in those countries that survive the most, because there's not that shock between what they used to have and the way things are now. And here in America that there is a great shock that is still taking place. People cannot believe that they're going into a store and their item that has been marketed to be on that shelf for the last 20 years is no longer available. And they're having to wait a week or a couple of weeks to get those things, or 6 months to get a washer machine, 8 months to get a stove. Their shoes aren't available. These are real abrupt changes. And they're changes that are going to continue. If we look at the breakdown, which I know you have warned about personally, you have warned about the breakdown in the just-in-time delivery system and how once it took place, there were going to be cracks that were always going to be there. We're starting to see that right now, those cracks that will never, ever be filled again. And look at freight shipping, 500% increases in the cost. We're not even seeing those cost averages take place at the store yet. So if something used to cost you $10, we could be looking at it costing $50, $100 in the future. The 20% increase that we're seeing at the grocery store right now might be minimal to what we see in the future. So I think that everyone's game plan should be about buffering, should be about creating a fire break, a buffer around what is happening for you and your family. And you can do that by getting some food stored in your pantry. You can grow a couple of things on your windowsill, or if you have the option of a garden. You really need to take all of these aspects of preparedness into thought and see how you can achieve your goals. Number one, of course, is security, because if you can't hold on to your goods, and I mean your life or the lives of your children, look, we have violence and crime increasing across the world and across the United States. Grandmas are getting knocked down at the grocery store as they put the food inside of their trunk, and that food is getting stolen and taken somewhere else. People are scoping out other individuals' Amazon boxes and stealing those. The violence and crime is really only at the beginning. So you need to be able to protect yourself and your family through whatever means you find agreeable to yourself. Then you need to consider your water preparedness. Do you have a whole house filter, or do you have a Sawyer mini filter? At the very least, it's only $20 at Amazon or at Walmart. Do you have some food? Do you have over-the-counter medicine? Because the gaps that you're seeing at the grocery store or at the supply store right now are really small compared to what we're going to see come winter or come the longer that this disaster continues to last.
Another thing about preparedness is just how do you even be aware of what the real threats are so that you can be properly prepared? You've described some things that people have, I guess they first got a wake-up call, most people, when we had the original COVID lockdowns happening back in 2020, like say February, March, April timeframe. The whole meme of stores running out of toilet paper was the most well known, but it was certainly people like yourself and myself were not scrambling at the store for toilet paper at that time. So that's one thing that people have become aware of, is you got to have some basic stock of supplies on hand. But there's something broader than that. How do you even find out the truth about these situations? Just a tiny little example here, and then I'd like to unleash you on this one. We've been getting multiple acquaintances and good friends and connections who are in the medical field who are being told they must either submit to a procedure that they don't want to, or they will have to leave their job. and many are choosing to leave their job. We had a good friend who was actually discharged from the military. Her whole family for generations, honorable military family. She was an exemplary member of the Marines and got discharged because she wouldn't submit to this procedure. This is causing, and sometimes en masse, departures of staffs of certain hospitals, whether it's nurses, doctors, whether it's police and firefighter, that sort of thing. Different unions are starting to stand up for some of their people. But in short, there's this talent drain, and we can talk about the impact on those people's lives. But what I'm trying to get at is that the impact, for example, in the healthcare industry, is understaffed hospitals. And so the way that this is presented then on the evening news is hospitals nearing capacity. Hospitals, the medical system is strained, and the narrative that's being pitched is that it's the severity of this particular illness that we should all be afraid of, and the one evidence of that severity is that the hospitals are stretched to capacity, rather than saying that the oppressive or arbitrary or unnecessary mandates that are being imposed on people that violate the Geneva Convention or whatever are driving people to leave their jobs. And so that's not what's being talked about. What's being talked about is the severity and increasing the fear. How do we find out the truth versus the narrative?
There's a couple of things I want to tackle in that. And the first one, I have two close friends who are nurses, and both of them are against any sort of mandate to change anything about themselves that they are unsure of. And so they're in that exact position. One of them has already gotten the call from their HR department that says they have by this day that they have to make these personal health changes or they're out. And the other one is sort of waiting to see what happens. But they're both against it, and they're both ready to leave their job for it, with the unknown on the other side of that. What are they going to do? They're nurses. They can't get into another nursing position likely as long as these federal changes continue to take place. And so what do they do? And that's fought often with something along the lines of denial. One of the individuals, their husband and I were talking the other night, and we were talking about how they don't believe it could ever happen. I had to remind them that we're in the year 2021. This is the 20th year that we have had the national emergency for the 2001 September 11th disaster. We have had it renewed every single year by each standing president of the United States so that the Patriot Act and other acts could stand to remove some of your constitutional rights, or at least push them to the side so that the government can act as it wishes. So anytime anybody says that will never happen, I just want them to remember it has been happening for the last 20 years, and it's going to continue to happen. So how do we become aware of what is happening? How do we prepare for these types of things? Well, it starts, like you asked, with information gathering, and there is so much on each side. And it really comes down to a person is at a fork in the road in their future, and they are going to have to either make a decision to take the left-hand side or the right-hand side of that fork. They're going to have to do a lot of discerning, a lot of searching, but there's a little bit of truth, as there often is, on both sides of the story. There's a little bit of truth. Every person in every war, if you take a war like China wanting to go get Taiwan and the United States holding on to Taiwan, the men and women of those militaries will fight because they all think they're doing the right thing. And so the division is very strong. And, that each side will pull apart different parts of facts and try to lay them before you to make your own decision. And how do you really gather that information, and how do you start to discern it? I think it just takes a person's time and research and initiative to want to make the right decision and look back at some groundwork like the Constitution and like information that will keep them safe and allow them to have the sort of future that they want in their family. Because you have to remember that, just like I talked about at the beginning of this episode, how we are servants for 14 years of our lives to another corporation or industry, we put those chains on willingly. We locked those chains around our neck ourselves, and we continue to do so. And humans will do those things forever until they won't. There's always a breaking point. There's always a line in the sand, and you're starting to see that line in the sand come out right now. And sometimes it's correct, and sometimes it's misdirected. But you're seeing that violence increase. And I don't mean just, criminals in masks going around and acting badly or doing things violently. I'm just talking about a person's line in the sand was crossed, and so they act upon it. And we're starting to see these things that really harken back to the times of revolution in every industry or in every country, the times of social unrest, the times of discontent. And so we need to gather as much information, build your puzzle as best you can so that you can get a picture of what is actually happening. You know that large media corporations or conglomerates are going to control one side of that narrative. They're going to control one side of that information, and it's not always the right side. And so the other voices get pushed over here. And yeah, you can find them, but the bigger corporations have already won because they've already discredited the other voices, the other stories, the other truths. And so how do you go about actually finding that information? That's really a tricky subject, but I think it's going to take a person's willingness and initiative to search it out and then discern it. What do you think?
One of the things that concerns me, 2 points in response to what you just asked. One is that it's been baffling to me. I didn't even come at this with a preconceived notion years ago that this was even happening. It just as a very, what I would consider a casual observer, because I was so focused on doing my career job and on raising our kids and trying to make sure we got through our weekly schedule, getting to the workout, YMCA, and getting our homework, the homeschooling done. And I really was kind of unplugged in a large extent from the main culture. But then walking past a whole row of different brands of magazines and newspapers every time we went into the YMCA to do our workouts 3 times a week, I just couldn't help but just notice as I walked past certain images and phrases that were on the front of all these different so-called brands of newspapers and magazines. At the time, it was Obama prior to the election. And it was just like, I couldn't even know he was running against anybody else because I never saw anybody else pictured on those fronts, but this one individual. So that's one of the things that's baffling to me, or remarkable to me, that I think people might not even question, and that is that regardless that they think that there's diversity in the media that's available, whether it's through print or whether it's through broadcast or whether it's through cable or online or whatever, that they're getting the same, we're getting fed the same story, the same one official narrative. Then it happened again when it had to do with organ donation. And it happened to me again when it had to do with this most recent illness that people are supposedly supposed to be very, very concerned about, taking all these coercive measures, to lock down and everything, is that there is one side, one message. And I thought, that's really strange, because as a engineer and a scientist by training and by career, I'm quite accustomed to looking. As a scientist, you look at the evidence you see in reality, and you observe things, and then you form a hypothesis about it. You try to do some experimentation, but you try to keep this. You try to gather observation and awareness and then try to have a theory that might align with reality. But you don't expect to just see one-sided. That's a very unnatural and artificial type environment. You don't expect to see your data all like on one side of the meter and never on the other side. They usually expect there to be some noise and some variation, and you don't trust if your meter needles are all pegged to one side. You think something's unplugged because we're not getting a true signal here.
Yeah, I think that we're going to continue to see that sort of one-sided discussion well into the future, and it's going to be until there is really a standing up. Look at what's happening in the wage revolution right now, in the worker revolution. A lot of humans are standing up and saying, I don't want to be a slave to this anymore. And they're doing it at their own cost and their own future. And they are saying, you know what, I'm just going to move in with my mother. I'm just going to move in with family. I'm going to scale back on everything, take the car, take the house, do whatever. I'm not doing it anymore. And that is the sort of rebellion that we're going to see on a larger scale that we can only hope will be as peaceful as a wage revolution or a wage rebellion. But if history tells us anything, it's that when people finally stand up to that forced change, it's not going to be peaceful. And that's why you and your family need to remain on top of your awareness. Know what is happening. Don't let it consume you. I recently had an acquaintance, not a friend, but an acquaintance who had a child, and they're letting what is happening in the world consume them, and it's driving them, it's pushing them to action. And that's not necessarily the right course of action. Awareness and a posture that is ready to act is what I would suggest to everybody. Know what is happening around you. Have a list of your own triggers. If a reaction, an action and a reaction. If this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Just like if you're in a wildfire prone area, if a wildfire happens, you already know your plan to evacuate. You already know where you're going to go, what you're going to do. But if you take somebody from a coastal state right on the beach, and if they have a wildfire, they don't even know what to do. They have no idea how to evacuate. Similarly, other places don't know what to do in the case of tornadoes or hurricanes. Have a plan and be ready. Be postured to act no matter what comes at you.
Another challenge I think we're facing, because those who speak out, and I'm sure our people who are watching this, guys, you must notice that Brad and I are trying to be very careful in the way that we express ourselves here. We're trying to talk about very important things without saying them in ways that would be provocative or in any way. So in this, what I would call cancel culture, or in this culture where people can be deplatformed either on a very high profile or on a very micro level, a very individual level, how do we stay in contact with those whom we care about? And that might be just our immediate family members. It might be a broad network of friends and acquaintances that have, want to support each other. It may be a really broad audience. Like we have, 60,000 subscribers, and you've got a huge audience on full spectrum survival. So how do we stay in touch with each other despite the cancel culture and the deplatforming?
Yeah, that's an important subject that we should all think about. And that's making sort of backup plans and talking with people. I think that having a sort of as much control as you can will help. So even if it's just a website and you're talking about those types of things, if it's family and friends and you're talking about, let's remain in contact through email, or let's do these types of things, and let's really hash the problems that we have out. You're going to see right now there's so much family that's been divided, and there are people who just won't talk to their family members that they loved and would have done anything for just a couple of years ago. And the division really is that strong. So I think that it's twofold. One is cancel culture, which is where our division will be controlled by a larger corporation with a sort of a trending platform. And then the other one is personal. Is it husband and wife that gets divided over preparedness or, biological threats or whatever it might be? Is it, family members? One family might think that another person should be doing one thing, and the other one is totally against it for their own reasons. So we need to first be able to look past those things and know that that division is always being controlled by somebody. And who's really gaining right now? Because it's not you. It's not me. We're not gaining anything right now. They might say that, okay, well, we'll raise the wages. But if they raise inflation, who's gaining? Nobody. We look at corporations. You've got Tyson, you've got Campbell's and Kraft, and all these corporations saying, well, we had to raise the prices because the cost of our raw goods and manufacturing just became too exorbitant. And yet they're posting record profits. So there is definitely a game going on here, and we need to be able to remain connected with or without this sort of overreach. So I think the best way to do that is to sort of go back to ground zero. Nobody can stop me from mailing a letter. Sure, they can make it expensive, and yes, when everybody's poor, it's going to be hard to do. But no one can necessarily stop that, or at least the plans aren't in place right now to stop that sort of communication. And have a plan. If you and your family say, okay, if we can't get in contact with each other, if the grid goes down, if phone lines go down, let's meet up here. This is where I'm going to go to wait for you. Then no matter what happens in the world, whether it's an active crisis in your area where somebody comes into your supermarket and really tries to do harm to everybody there on a massive scale, whether it's fires, earthquakes, a nuclear disaster, no matter what it is, if you can't get a hold of those people that you love and you want to protect, you know where to meet, and you go there and you wait for them when that does happen. And I think if we just start to go back to sort of the root of communication, that's going to give us the best chances to stay, close to the people that we love.
Can we turn that around and talk about the flip side for a few moments? And that is not just how to stay connected, but how to maintain any shred we have left of privacy in this era when it seems like we're under constant surveillance of everything we do. For example, you and I are having a chat. We wanted to share this with those who have common interest with this. And yet we know that we're using technological platforms that are actually processing every word we say and sorting it into different categories of interest. So, how do we maintain any semblance of privacy? And maybe it's some of those same low-tech, old-school methods that you were just describing, but you tell us what you think is most useful, most accessible to people.
I think that people need to take their own ideas into what privacy means for them. Is it targeted advertising? Well, that might seem pretty safe at the end of the day, but is it really safe? Or is it, listing and being, put into a category as an individual, which we know is happening? Is it just general overreach where every text message, every phone call, the duration of phone calls, your geolocation, all of those things are mapped, and basically a digital picture is built around each individual user and person around the country? And because of that 20-year-old national emergency that we renew every year, any government organization can just go in and take a look at that picture of you as an individual. So we need to take into consideration, I think there's really, do you go completely off grid where you have as a near zero, I don't think you can ever have a zero, but a near zero footprint, or do you sort of skew the results? I think skewing the results is always a good move, and that's maybe you have a Facebook page that is public. When the media comes to search your name, they're going to see that you are a nice, car washing on the weekend, grass mowing, football loving, just like everybody else, Joe Schmo. That will skew some of those results of, maybe the media would take a look at that and go, well, this isn't, we don't even want to show this because this doesn't give the same emotional triggers that we want to, as if a person was a firearms range, a whiskey drinking ex-Marine, So what you can do to skew those results, what you can do to hold on to your privacy, and what you can do to talk with friends and family, still be open, still be who you are, but still hold on to that, is definitely something we need to explore.
The other thing that you and I had talked about briefly, and we wanted to circle back on, is this idea of our responsibility to the next generation. And it's certainly true that a lot of what we're talking about was just natural and intrinsic to our forebears, our great-great-grandparents, our great-grandparents, in some cases even our grandparents. Everything we just talked about would have been, except for maybe the technological stuff, but anything about raising gardens and having a place to meet and stuff like that, that's just common sense. But it's like for the last couple generations, we've really fallen as a culture for this idea of comfort and convenience. And so that leads to dependency. If we look into independence, they say keep the options open for the future because we don't know what the future is going to bring, but let's leave our options open. That requires a level of independence. Can you talk to us for a few moments again about how that is planting a seed for the future generation? And it's an action of hopefulness, frankly. It's an expression of hope to say the future, I want to build a future that's worth looking forward to.
Yeah, I think that that comes in multiple facets. So one of those facets is leading by example. My children know they didn't just turn a certain age and say, Dad, I want to learn how to make a fire, using wet wood. They were doing it with me. They were out there with me doing those things. They like the outdoors and they like exploring nature just because I had done those things. So leading by example, it doesn't just have to be that sort of mentoring kind of leading. When, like you said, the toilet paper crisis took place, or canned food and over-the-counter medication crisis where there were shortages, I had people come out of the woodwork that had known me from before any sort of survival presence was ever made public. And they said, Brad, what can I do here? Or what can I do here? And they started seeing that disaster in a new light. And so they started making changes in their own household and for their own future. And some of those changes have stuck, and that's for the better. So we can lead by example and help give people those choices just by the things that we do. And another one is make smart choices. Every chance you get to make a choice, try to make the best one. I get asked through email, through YouTube all the time, should I buy this solar generator? Should I buy this freeze dryer? Should I buy these different things? Or should I pay off my car debt? Should I pay off my credit card debt? All of these things. And so an individual has to make the best choices for themselves. And I'm always a fan of the return on investment. So if you have an ROI on let's say, I'll give you an example that's very close to my heart because I just made a new inexpensive purchase on a wood splitter because we're taking down an acre of woods and we have some hardwood there. Like I said, we're terracing it for our future gardens. And I don't want to waste that wood. And I would spend so much of my time cutting up all of that wood that my return on investment on my time would not be there. So a couple of $100 put towards a wood splitter is a much better ROI. And I think that sort of investment will allow other people, my neighbors, my family, my friends, they can use that investment and we can all grow together. I think another thing that we need to talk about is group preparedness. It's very easy in the preparedness genre to be very lone wolf, not talk to anybody. I can do it all myself, or I've never trusted anyone, and so I have to do it all myself. Those are very common modes in preparedness. And I think that is something we need to look at other cultures around the world that are undergoing financial crisis events or civil wars or social events. And we need to see how those communities are thriving. And you have places in Syria, you have apartment complexes that there are just the people from the apartment standing at the bottom at the entrance with the security tools that they need to fend off an attack. And they'll only let people from the apartment in, or somebody will call down and say, hey, I have this person coming. Will you let them in? You can't do that if you were just one person. When a car comes here, and I told you off screen earlier about a personal event that I had take place, I had neighbors calling me to say, hey, who's that car in your driveway? Or do you need me to come down? Because we each have that line of communication that says, I'm kind of a rural person. I'm kind of a hermit. I don't go very many places. I try to do what I can with what I have. So if you see somebody out here or if you see something suspicious, come down or give me a call. And in the same way, I'll go and do that for them. So if we build these small communities of people you can trust, and you have to gauge that trustworthiness. Call them when you have a flat tire. Call them when you need your garden weeded. Go to them when they have a flat tire, so that everybody knows that it's not just a matter of spoken convenience where, oh yeah, I've got your back, oh yeah, we're thicker than blood. No, you're actually going to go help them when the sweat is coming off of your own brow or your muscles are tired because you're working with them. Build that trust together, and then you're going to have a better chance at building that longer lineage and one that your children can take after and one that everybody else can sort of get involved in, but know the limitations of that and know that at the end of the day, survival is very preservation of self. And so if I can't preserve myself as a father, as a husband, as a man, then I can't help my wife and I can't help my children if a violent altercation were to take place. So kind of start inward and then work outward and say, okay, I know that I can protect myself, feed myself, give myself water, treat myself to a good number of medical problems. Now let's prepare to help the wife, the children, everybody else. And as we start inward and work outward, we build a community that really gives us a hope for the future.
The one last thing I was hoping we could just touch on briefly is food security. We've had Joel Salatin, the founder of Polyface Farms, on multiple times. And the previous time we had him on, the message he had with us is you've got to get your food security figured out now. And it had partly to do with the fractured supply chain and how that was impacting worldwide food supply. I'll put a little hopeful example in here from a viewer named Raymond Chamas who wrote in, and I think you can springboard from this. He says, I reduce the number of things I buy at the grocery store first. I buy about 20 items altogether. not including herbs, spices, salt, oils, as I could survive easily without them. I also eat nearly all the fat on my meats. I save bacon and beef fats for cooking, routinely eat leftovers. I canned when I was a kid with my grandparents, so buying a box of each of peaches, tomatoes, and pears to can is not a leap for me. My entire life trained me for this. You can do a little more to prepare every day, like pull some cash out of the bank, fix up your house, buy a chest freezer, etc. Go to your library book sale and buy or check out a pre-1960s cookbook. You'll be amazed at how much money you can save while eating delicious food you grew, prepared, and cooked. Your thoughts on food security?
I think that's an awesome outlook from one of the viewers here in the community. And it's one that's very similar to my wife and I, because if you look at our recurring grocery list, it's the same thing every time. Rice, canned goods, canned vegetables. We don't buy as much fresh fruits, but I'll buy canned fruits all the time. We buy what's in season, we buy what's cheap, we buy what's on sale, but it's the same things over and over and over again. And one thing I want to take away from what your viewer wrote in, spices are very important to me. And I don't think that I would enjoy sustenance as much without that. Turmeric, black pepper, both great things for keeping your gallbladder working right. They act as a blood thinner. Garlic, that's a high blood pressure anti-high blood pressure medication. That's antihypertensive. And NIH.gov studies show that even powdered garlic is the same as first-line antihypertensive medications. Not only do they have good benefits, but they also provide an enjoyment for me in my own meals. But learning how to cook with less, don't buy as much packages, that's really advice for everybody that no one could ever surpass. Food security, which is your question, is something that has to be started. You have to start handling that today. I told everybody on my channel the other day to buy popcorn kernels. And that was a shock for a lot of people. You can go buy a 50-pound bag of popcorn kernels on Amazon. You can buy them at Sam's Club or Costco sometimes for anywhere from $20 to $50. That is going to give you a pest-hardened, long-duration, storable good that you can either pop if you need it. You can grind it into corn flour to make your cornbread, to make your Johnny cakes. You can use it in all sorts of ways. And it's going to give you that shelf-stable, sustainable prep that you don't have to spend a lot of money on. I don't advocate Mountain House ever. I don't advocate, these large, expensive, buy X number of months worth of food from this organization, because all they're doing is throwing calorie dense, sometimes junk at you and telling you that you should be able to survive off of this. No, I say go buy your rice, your flour, your sugar, your spices, make sure you have your salts, buy all these things now with your multivitamins. And it's not that hard. You do these things and you're going to be ready. You do these things and you're going to live through the crisis and give yourself a wildfire break, and you'll know what to do next.
We've been speaking with Brad Harris, the founder of Full Spectrum Survival. Brad, if people want to make sure that they get on your channel, that they can understand these out, because you put out a lot of updates, how do they get plugged in?
Just go, we've been shadow banned on YouTube for about 2 years. You can type in Full Spectrum Survive and we still won't come up as a suggestion. So you have to actually type in Full Spectrum Survival. You'll see us there. Just go ahead and subscribe to us there. We publish almost every day. We talk about current events and how you can get ready for the unseen events of the future. And it's a great community, just like the community you have here, where everybody's here to really help each other.
Well, and folks, if you want to make sure you don't miss out on any of ours, because we've heard the same thing from our subscriber base. It's like, hey, I'm not receiving notifications of your emails, or you never interviewed so-and-so. You asked for questions and then you never interviewed them. So because that does happen, and we have no control over that part of it, but what you can do is go to libertyandfinance.com and put your name and email address in and click submit. You'll get a confirming email. If you confirm, you're in, and you'll get a notification in your inbox of every single interview that we produce with all of our guests, and a little description. Any links that they provide will be there. You won't miss out on a thing at libertyandfinance.com. Brad from Full Spectrum Survival, thanks for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers / Liberty and Finance.
Thank you very much.
This week's special with Miles Franklin Precious Metal Investments. $20, $10, and $5 gold Liberty coins. A true piece of Americana. Call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.